I always knew I was second choice. This truth echoed through my mind like a relentless drumbeat, loud and unforgiving. My name is Victoria Anderson, and at 28 years old, I never imagined I would find myself wrestling with the demons of my family. As the only daughter, I had always believed I held a special place in my family's heart, but I was wrong. In Mapleton, where people knew me as the diligent overachiever, I was merely the pale shadow of my cousin William, the one everyone doted on. He was the fun one, the one with charming stories and easy laughter, while I stood in the background, feeling like a misty, disappointing dark cloud over all their sunny days. My mother, sweet and loving, but oh so blinded by her adoration for her star child, constantly hailed William as the brilliant light of our family. "Look at what he can do, Vicky," she would exclaim, her eyes bright with pride while I stood there, smiling through the pain and envy. In that moment, I would be reminded that my achievements, my high grades, my tireless efforts at school and my job were never enough to overshadow his presence. Yet I trudged on, working tirelessly, juggling school and part-time jobs, convinced that someday, when the family fortunes shifted, my hard work would finally be rewarded. I often thought of the day I would walk into the family gathering and have everyone look at me in wide-eyed wonder, realizing they had underestimated me all along. I could envision the influential positions, the overflowing love and support, and most importantly, the acknowledgement I deserved. However, life had a cruel sense of humor, and everything changed when my grandfather passed away, leaving behind a $500,000 property that, as per his will, was to be equally divided among his 3 children, my mother, Uncle Tony, and Aunt Linda. I stood in the living room of my grandfather's old house, surrounded by the fading scent of aged wood and memories, the walls filled with portraits of family gatherings, laughter captured in frames. This was a house that had been a witness to countless celebrations, birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries, but today it felt heavy with loss. My fingers brushed against the spines of photo albums stacked on a nearby table, a haunting reminder of all that we had shared. As my family gathered together for what should have been a solemn occasion, I had expected a moment of reflection, a time to grieve and remember him. I envisioned whispers of love, parting words, and perhaps a sense of closeness that would unite us in sorrow. But instead, the air turned thick with tension when my mother made her announcement. I remembered every inflection in her voice, every flicker of her eyes as she dismissed the will like it was just some old, crumpled piece of paper. "The property is going entirely to William. He needs it more than you do." My heart dropped into an abyss. I wanted to shout, scream, or even throw something, but I simply stood frozen, mouth agape, trying to digest her words as they bore down on me like icy snow on a warm summer day. "What?" I managed to croak, my breath hitching in my throat. "Mom, you know he has never held a job. I have taken care of myself since I was 15 years old." My voice was shaking, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. I felt the heat creeping up my neck, but I willed myself to remain composed. Yet as I watched her sweep her blonde hair back, offering me that flick of a wrist as if I were a pesky fly buzzing around her head, I felt something inside me twist and churn. My heart cracked, splinters radiating outward as William, sweet William, a perpetual student whiz kid of a cousin, a leech on our family's resources, stood glaring at me like some kind of victory-laden trophy. I glanced over at him. There he stood, casually leaning against the mantelpiece, arms crossed over his chest, a smug grin plastered on his face. The light from the window caught his hair, turning it golden, an ironic halo for a boy who lived ruthlessly off the kindness of others. In that moment, fury washed through me, a tidal wave of indignation crashing against the shores of my soul. I felt the creeping bitterness, pulsing in time with the heartbeat that now thudded in my temples. "This isn't fair," I shot back. The words escaped my lips before I could wrestle them back down, more of a plea than a retort, but even I could hear how futile they sounded. My mother's unwavering gaze, a mix of irritation and pity, warned me that I was losing this battle before it even began. This was familiar territory, a repeat of countless disagreements where I would be tossed aside, unable to wrestle free of her grip on her world. "Victoria, you need to be more understanding," she said, her voice sharp, as though cutting me off entirely. "William has ambitions, but his requirements are different. He needs the support of the family." Her words hit me like a slap, stinging, vividly red with the truth that bled over into my reality. understanding. I felt the years of baking in the dark, forced into the background while he twinkled brightly like the first star of the evening. I had tried to be the good daughter, the dutiful child who didn't scream or act out. I had sacrificed so much to do right by them, constantly striving to prove that I was worth more than her whispers to me about being the backup option. But my requirements are different too, I insisted, tears welling up in my eyes, out of sheer frustration. This should be my chance. I am the one who needs it. The room started to spin with my emotions, a whirlpool of anger and defeat swirling around me. I could feel the remnants of hope slipping away, the belief I had cradled in my heart that this time would be different crashing down, echoing painfully, like a glass splintering against the stone. I am tired of you throwing your accomplishments in our faces, my mother shot back, her voice rising in pitch, mimicking the shrill tone of a siren wailing through the night. Every time we compare you two, you're always the one fixated on being better. Why can't you just let it go? This is about family, not just your selfish needs. I could feel the heat of my body rising, the pulsing insult wrapping around me tighter with each word. I looked at William again. He was watching, and I could see the satisfaction dancing in those gleaming eyes. My heart raced, fueled by a desire to fight back. Selfish, I retorted, my voice quaking but determined. I have done everything you asked for. I have turned up for every family event and a million little things, while he gets rewarded for being the life of the party. It isn't fair. The last word slipped out as a desperate whisper, clinging to the air and hanging between us like a huge boulder. Another flick of her wrist, as if she could wave away my pain. We don't have time for this, she dismissed me, her gaze flickering back to William, and I felt a small part of me shatter. The weight of betrayal wrapped around me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. Can't you see how you've treated me? The words fell from my lips, a confession laced with desperation. I wanted her to hear the truth that had grown twisted in the depths of my heart for so long. I have worked harder than he ever has, and I have never asked for anything in return. But when it finally matters, you chose him. She was, in my mind, the orchestrator of this crumbling reality. Mom's eyes softened, but not with compassion. Rather, it was tinged with exasperation, as though she had grown weary of having to explain the same message yet again. Sometimes, dear, she said slowly, as if she were talking to a small child, you have to look beyond what's fair to what's necessary. William is not just a child, he is family in need. My heart sank further, more fragments breaking away, scattering like leaves caught in the wind. How was I supposed to compete with family in need, when my own heart was in laceration? There was a moment, one agonizing split of silence, where I could feel the veils breaking down, the room spinning in a haze of betrayal and hot tears. I could not fathom how any of them could see me as less than, as not enough. It was then that I noticed the old photographs on the wall, flickering memories I had once cherished, now alien and cruel. The family I longed to be a part of recoiled from me, leaving me isolated and small. As I stood there, surrounded by those that were meant to love me, I made a pledge that day. I would no longer be the quiet girl in the shadows, the diligent student overlooked in favor of the fun cousin. That day, amidst a flurry of emotions and hurt, I swore to take back my worth, to reclaim the power that had so often slipped through my fingers. There would be a reckoning, and I would no longer wear the label of second choice. My heart hardened with determination, and in that instant I became something new, someone ready to seek the life I was denied. This would not be forgotten, and it certainly would not pass without consequences. As voices faded into the background, I turned away from them, clenching my fists tightly at my sides. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, and I took a deep breath, releasing the bitterness that had been building for so long. I would find a way to flip the narrative, for I was far more than just an option. I was a force to be reckoned with. As their shadows spread over the room, I stepped firmly into the light, vowing I would no longer linger in the dark corners of family disappointment. I had learned the lessons of envy and pain all too well, and now I would dive headfirst into the depths of revenge that asked for my name in the days that followed my grandfather's funeral. The realities of family and loyalty came crashing down around my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. Shadows lingered in the dim, neglected corners of the old house, where dust motes danced in the shafts of light like lost hopes waiting to be reclaimed. My grandfather had given us this place, once alive with laughter and stories, but now it felt like a tomb haunted by my memories of better days. Each creak of the floorboards whispered accusations. "Where were you?" they seemed to ask. "Why didn't you fight for him?" I spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. How could my mother side with him, with my cousin William of all people? That smug little brat had never earned his worth, always asserting dominance through his charm, while leaving a trail of wreckage behind him. I could almost feel the weathered wood of the property gripping onto my hope, squeezing it tightly as if to remind me of its potential. The house hadn't been well taken care of over the years, paint peeling, weeds stubbornly pushing through cracked pavement, yet its worth ran deeper than mere numbers on an appraisal report. I had known it all along. I had lost so much, but now the fire inside me sparked brighter, a flicker giving way to flames. The old insecurities that had haunted me like specters were beginning to fade away, pushed aside by an overwhelming desire, justice or revenge, whichever arrived first. I could hear the words echo in my mind, "The house is mine to reclaim." With each hushed step across the creaking floorboards, I became more resolute. I was proactive now, a hunter gathering all the knowledge I could find. I combed through papers, documents that spoke of debts and obligations. The revelation struck me like lightning. My uncle, Tony, was drowning in the depths of his own troubles. A gambling addiction. I had heard the rumors, but considered them far-fetched until I uncovered the ugly truth. He was on the brink of losing his home, the very home where I had once played as a child with my cousins, the same home now threatened because of his reckless choices. Today would be my day, the day I made my move. I dialed the number of the diner where my uncle preferred to escape reality over cheap coffee and greasy burgers. The familiar smell of fried onion rings and flour rushed back to me the moment I pushed through the faded door. The clatter of dishes mixed with laughter and conversations as I scanned the booths bustling with life and activity. Where is he? I wondered, my heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. I spotted him seated in our classic booth, his head hung low, fingers tapping nervously against the formica table. "Tony," I greeted him, slipping into the opposite seat, my voice laced with an overly cheerful tone. "How have you been holding up?" I watched as his eyes flickered up to me, holding a mix of surprise and trepidation, the shadows of worry etched into the lines of his forehead. "Oh, you know," he sighed, the weight of his problems dragging out the usual vibrancy from his tone. "Just trying to keep my head above water, kid." He smiled weakly, the corners of his mouth turning up just enough to mask the turmoil underneath. It's brutal how life throws curveballs, isn't it? I leaned forward, lowering my voice as if confiding a secret. "I hear you need cash fast." I placed my hands gently on the table, watching as his gaze locked onto mine, a glint of hope reigniting his features. "Yeah," he said, almost hesitant. "You know how it is, just some bad luck at the tables." "Maybe I can help you," I offered casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What if I bought you out for $100,000? The words hung in the air between us like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. I watched as his eyes widened, the spark of desperation igniting into something resembling excitement. 100,000? Seriously? His voice pitched upward, the vulnerability slipping away. That would change everything for me. I would be able to. Let us not get ahead of ourselves, I urged, feigning restraint while forcing the smile on my face to remain. There's no rush, I just want to make sure you're comfortable with the idea. What will you do with the money? Pay off some debts, get back on my feet, you know. I studied him closely, each flicker of his expression a clue. You know, selling the property to me might be the best move for you. It's a solid offer, Tony. Plus, think of the peace of mind. His brow furrowed, just a moment of hesitation passing through his features as he glanced around the diner, perhaps considering the judgment of others. But the need for quick cash and the chance for liberation from his burdens quickly put the thought aside. I could really use that pretty quick, you know? There are some people I need to settle with. He rubbed at the back of his neck, the guilt slipping away little by little. Then it settled. I'll give you a check tomorrow morning, I declared, a confident grin stretching across my face. The adrenaline surged in my veins as I saw the realization dawn on him. He hadn't even thought to question why I was so willing to help. Are you sure you mean it? Oh, I do, I reassured, not bothering to hide the thrill of victory buzzing in my chest. Yeah, maybe I can start making some better decisions. His laughter was hollow, but I decided to play it off. Just enough diversion, a soothing balm for his frayed nerves. Welcome to the club, I said with a wink. the unspoken pact sealed between us. Tony would focus on his immediate troubles while I would lay my claim on what I rightfully deserved. This house, this detested relic of my childhood, was about to become the vessel of my rebirth. It didn't matter that he had no clue about the true worth of that property. I already knew. My heart raced with the prospect of what was to come. Over $600,000, resting just beneath the surface, more than enough to chase away the storm clouds that had gathered around my family. The whir of the diner began to blur in and out as I lost myself in thought. I could envision the delicate smirk playing on my mother's lips, pushing William to leapfrog into the spotlight, that cocky air of entitlement he carried so easily. But that would be over. No longer would I sit quietly, cornered by their drumming of family affection. Driven by an exhilarating cocktail of revenge and empowerment, I began to envision how it would feel to step into the old house, claiming the echoes of my grandfather's voice as my own. I could almost hear it already. This is where you belong. The past must be revived. The thought made the adrenaline pump harder in my veins. Tony leaned back, confidence creeping back into his demeanor despite the weight of our exchange. "Thanks, Victoria. I can't tell you how much this means to me," he sighed, wiping his brow as if he were shedding the weight of his debts in front of me. "You don't need to mention it," I replied casually, my voice smooth and soft. Then, looking into his eyes, I added, "But in return, I'd like a clean transfer, no strings attached." I nudged my plate aside, watching the gears in his head clicking back together as he faced the reality of his loss, the chills settling over us. "Sure, that's fair enough," he answered, the weight of the world finally lifting for a moment. I watched as the spark in his eye dimmed, realization dawning that he was relinquishing not just a piece of property but a piece of himself, of his pride. "I'll come by tomorrow morning and we can discuss the details. This can be painless," I suggested, the warmth of my intentions laced with the cold, calculating edge of my desire. "Yeah, okay," he muttered, blinking as he processed everything. Perhaps he had hoped to reveal the shambles of his life to me, or perhaps he wanted nothing more than to be saved, but the latter wouldn't come from me, not after what so many had chosen to overlook. As I walked away, the smell of fried food lingered in my nostrils, a welcome reminder that life continued on. I stepped into the bright daylight outside, breathing in the crisp air. The sensation of power whispered through me, and I let the sunlight wash over my skin, the warmth enveloping me like a shield. I could already anticipate the look in my mother's eyes when I finally stepped forward and revealed my spoils. The golden opportunity, holding it amidst their storm with confidence. William would be left with nothing. Nothing. "Tomorrow," I murmured under my breath, a simmering promise building within me. Tomorrow, I would forge my path to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Tomorrow, the world would spin back to its rightful axis. Tomorrow, I would take back my life. The lights were dim in the conference room, where the heavy mahogany table lay at the center like an altar, and the sharp scent of polished wood lingered in the air. I could feel my pulse thumping wildly in my ears as the minutes crept forward in agonizing suspense. Each tick of the clock seemed to mock my anxiety. The weight of the envelope in my hand felt surreal, a tangible manifestation of everything I had rehearsed through countless sleepless nights. It was the embodiment of my revenge, a final blow against years of familial favoritism. Everyone slowly filtered into the room, their faces a mix of uncertainty, curiosity, and for some, a glimmer of anticipation. My mother, with her meticulously styled hair and impeccably pressed blouse, strode in with an air of authority, scanning the room with discerning eyes. William followed, his confident stride signaling that he believed this gathering was for his benefit, a confirmation of his supremacy in our little family microcosm. My uncle ambled in last, his brow knotted with concern, possibly sensing a tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. I stood, rooted at the head of the table, almost numb to the panic swirling inside me. But I reminded myself that this was my moment, the culmination of my silent suffering and my careful plotting. My confidence bubbled beneath my skin, an irresistible force pushing me onward even as I felt the suffocating weight of the moment. "Everyone, I have something important to share," I said, my voice steady, projecting authority rather than the quaking nerves I felt inside. They looked at me, expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion. I glanced at my mother, whose expression morphed from questioning to wary as she sensed that something was amiss. The manila envelope felt warm in my grip, and when I released the clasp, the rustle of paper echoed through the room like the crack of thunder. I handed it directly to William, watching his face as his fingers grazed the edges of the papers. "Congratulations, William! You just lost your inheritance." In an instant, a tense silence descended like a curtain over us, thick and suffocating. I relished this moment, a twist of fate I had orchestrated with meticulous care. I could almost feel the energy shifting, a charged current snapping into existence, electrifying the air around us. Disbelief flickered across the faces of my family members, and I found myself drinking in their reactions, savoring the moment. My mother leaped to her feet, her voice clouded with fury. "You cannot do this. That property belongs to William." The sharpness of her tone sliced through the air, and I watched her jaw clench in outrage, color rising in her cheeks. Each word that erupted from her mouth felt like a stab of validation for my decision, a confirmation that I had finally struck a chord. "Remember your words, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady, even though I could feel the heat rising in me. "You said he needed it more. You said it yourself." A bitter laugh slipped from my lips, tinged with the satisfaction I had been longing for all these years. Behind William's eyes, disbelief burned like fire. He opened and closed his mouth, struggling to form words as confusion twisted his features, an expression I had never seen on him in all my life. Maybe I had finally pulled the curtain back on the fantasy he had lived in, where he was the favorite son destined for nothing but success. The silence buzzed, thick with tension, reverberating off the walls like a live wire. "Explain yourself, Victoria," my mother commanded, her fury amplifying by the second. She was a storm, a whirlwind of reaction, turning away from William to face me. "What kind of game is this? How could you even consider undermining your brother like this? You are destroying our family." Her accusations rattled me, but they also fueled the fire burning bright inside me. All the moments when I had felt like a shadow, watching my brother receive all the accolades, the love, and the support, began rushing back like a flood. "You've made your choices, Mom," I fired back, managing to keep my voice even amid the clamor. "I'm just here to make mine, and this time it is going to be on my terms." "Don't be dramatic. You will regret this," she shouted, and her voice echoed through the room, but I stood tall, knowing that at last I was grounded in my own truth. I felt strong, almost invincible, a sense of exhilaration coursing through me like wildfire. "Regret," I said, forced to contain the fire within, desperate to keep my expression neutral and assertive. "Given how you have always treated me like an afterthought, this is the moment I have dreamed of. I'm reclaiming what was taken from me, all the care and concern you showered on him. I can't just sit back and watch William be coddled any longer while I hover in the background." The muffled arguments rose up like a cacophony of overlapping voices, each adding more chaos to the room. My uncle interjected, trying to calm the tempest that had erupted. "Wait, everyone, let's take a step back," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We need to understand this before it spirals too far." But the storm was already raging, and I savored the tumult around me. My heart, impossibly light, beat a rhythm of triumph in my chest as I observed my mother's face contort with a mix of anger and disbelief as she struggled to comprehend the sudden upheaval. "William needs this for his future," she continued, shaking her head as if she could will the event to disappear. "You know he has plans. This is not the time to make petty decisions." "Petty?" I shot back, unable to help the sharpness in my voice. "This is calling you all out on how you treat me. Don't twist it into something trivial. The privilege you've given him has clouded your judgment. What, just because he's older, it gives him the right to everything you've built?" William, now holding the papers with reluctant care, sharpened his gaze on me. "You're being melodramatic. Just because you didn't get the attention you craved doesn't mean you can upend everything. This could ruin us." His voice was defensive, desperation clinging to his words, and I only felt invigorated by it. "Maybe a little chaos is what this family needs," I said, my voice dropping to a darker timbre. "Perhaps it's time for the rest of us to see how it feels to matter." I felt powerful. The look of anguish spreading across their faces like a canvas absorbing ink was almost intoxicating. "No one will take you seriously if you keep this up. Just stop." William's frustration seeped out in raw tones, a plea hanging loose in the chaos. But I was steadfast. "Why? Because your version of serious has always come at my expense. Today is about recognizing what is unfair, about tearing down the facade you've built around me. No more denial. No more hiding behind family ties." The room pulsed with incredulity, and the voices still rose in protest while I reveled in the dissent, my insides swirling in delicious satisfaction. The tendrils of power wrapped around my heart tightened, and it thrilled me to realize, the more they resisted, the more emboldened I became. Suddenly, I heard my mother take a shuddering breath, her fury simmering just beneath the surface. "You want to talk about fairness? What kind of sister does this to her brother? Do you think tearing him down will raise you up?" I felt my breath catch for a moment, the accusation stinging like a slap to the face, but I refused to shrink back. "I am not tearing him down, I am just declaring my right to stand on my own." "Oh, please, Victoria." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Your right to stand on your own, this isn't the way, isn't it?" I interjected, and silence wrapped around us again, thick and charged. "Or maybe this is finally the moment I stop being the invisible woman, the one erased in your family's narrative. The moment I reclaim my voice. You taught me to be silent, to always let the others take the stage. But not anymore. I've earned my place here, and it's time I take it." My voice echoed through the cluttered room, where murmurs had now faded to an anxious quiet. It was the sound of a family in disarray, and for once, I was the one standing tall while they fought the inevitable storm. The silence stretched on, and for the first time, I truly felt free. The chaos swirled like a tempest, but I stood grounded. I could feel the air shift as the weight of family ties trembled beneath the cracks forming in our foundations. I absorbed every moment, every quiver of disbelief, and it anchored me in my resolve. They wanted to hold me down, but I was no longer willing to be the one pushed aside. I was on my path to reclaiming everything I had been denied: the spotlight, the power, the narrative of my own life. As moments ticked by, I realized that I no longer needed to convince them of anything. This was about me. My heart pulsed with a fierce determination, thundering against the chaos. The night was just beginning, and I was ready to embrace everything that followed. I took a breath, powerful and affirming, before I added, "This is my story now. Buckle up." As I sat in the small cafe around the corner from my new apartment, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with sweet pastries inviting me to take another sip of my latte. The warmth of the cup contrasted sharply with the chill of the autumn air seeping through the glass doors. I took a moment to revel in the triumph of closing the sale. News of my victory had spread like wildfire throughout Mapleton, each whisper and pointed finger in the town carrying the weight of my newfound independence. The way people looked at me, those who had once dismissed me or tolerated me with pity, was intoxicating. I could almost feel the air crackling around me with the energy of change. Yet I kept my gaze steady on my latte, the swirling foam almost resembling a map of the roads I had taken to get here. My mother's tantrum held little sway over my contentment. Her angry rants still echoed in my mind as a distant storm, barely affecting the calm I had fought so hard to achieve. "Victoria, are you even going to answer me?" A voice broke through my isolated thoughts. I glanced up to see my real estate friend standing before me, arms crossed, brow raised in concern. "Sorry, caught up in my own world," I replied, offering a small smile that I hoped hinted at my gratitude. "You closed the sale?" he asked, excitement sparkling in his eyes. "Yes, can you believe it? $675,000. I almost shouted, the weight of the figure still sending a thrill through me. "That is amazing," he exclaimed, the cafe patrons casting curious glances at us. "What are you going to do with it?" "I got myself a small apartment," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "It's all mine. I can decorate it however I want, no interference, no need to tiptoe around anyone's feelings." "Good for you," he said, nodding in approval. "Finally taking control of your life." I took a sip of my latte, enjoying the creaminess that melted just like the bitter memories fading from my mind. "I really needed this. It feels liberating. Do you think your family will accept this freedom, especially after your mother's outburst?" "Honestly," I leaned in, lowering my voice, "it doesn't matter anymore. I am no longer chained to their expectations. I am finally free." I picked at the edges of the pastry on my plate, thinking about how the bitter mood that weighed down my childhood had slipped away from me like water through my fingers. Each rating from family whispers, every time their words sharpened into daggers, I had clutched tightly to those chains, locked in a cage of emotional turmoil I could not escape. My friend broke the silence, continuing, "They might throw more tantrums, but they'll get over it. Family often comes around, even if it takes time." "Maybe," I replied, suppressing a flicker of hope I could not afford to nurture right now. But I refused to be a puppet in their drama any longer. The sound of the cafe door opening interrupted us. a gust of cool air swirling around as another patron stepped inside. A brief glance told me it was a couple I recognized from high school, their laughter light and carefree, their lives seemingly untouched by the chaos that had enveloped my own. I recalled how I had spent years wishing for a life similar to theirs, wondering what it felt like to be unburdened and thriving. Mornings like this, I murmured, lost in thought, remind me of how far I have to go. How far? My friend probed gently. Far enough that the past feels like a different person's story, I confessed. I've learned the hardest lesson of all, the family ties that bind also suffocate. He nodded thoughtfully. The clinks and clatters of the cafe created a rhythm around us, adding to my sense of newfound freedom. So what's next for Victoria Anderson, the woman of the moment? I grinned at the title. I'm not sure yet, but I will figure it out. I have to honor this moment. It was about reclaiming my dignity, rewriting this story that has defined me for too long. There's power in that, he said, and we both know you have it in spades. The lingering bitterness from my childhood, a shadow of emotions I had kept tucked away, began to float to the surface as I recalled the many instances my mother had belittled me. Those memories no longer had the sting they once did. Instead, they became moments of resolve, shards of betrayal from which I had forged a new self. Thank you for being here, I said, feeling the physical weight of gratitude hanging in the air between us. Always. Count me in for the next chapter of your adventure, he replied earnestly, and I could sense the sincerity in his words. As we exchanged pleasantries, I felt an invigorating rush, transforming my heart and soul into something even more beautiful than what it was before. I realized my family's chaos was nothing but an echo from a place where I no longer belonged. As I stepped out of the cafe, the sun was setting low, casting everything in a warm, golden hue like the comforting embrace of a long-lost friend. A brisk breeze rustled the autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalk, each step I took punctuating my determination with purpose. Even in the shadow of my family's tumult, I had managed to emerge renewed, in a self-made cocoon of resilience. Each conflict, each harsh word from my mother now felt like gentle notes playing a haunting melody that carried me along on my journey of liberation. William can be miserable all he wants, I thought defiantly. This is my time, my reclamation. I chuckled softly, an impulsive gleam dancing in my eyes as I pictured how they must have reacted when the sale finalized. They had expected nothing more than to keep me bound to their whims, but now they would witness my metamorphosis. Approaching my new apartment building, I felt the excitement bubbling up within me, ready to erupt as I unlocked the door to my sanctuary. The air inside was cool and empty, waiting for life to fill every corner. I am home, I whispered, the echo of my words intensifying the emotion in the stillness. I took a deep breath, inhaling the potential wrapped in every wall, the promise of freedom vibrating with a palpable energy. I envisioned how I would paint the walls, selecting colors to match the emotions I now felt: fiery reds, soft blues, lush greens that spoke of growth and renewal. This is just the beginning, I murmured to myself, every syllable reinforcing my sense of purpose. The cries and curses from my family drifted further away in the rhythm of my heartbeat as I imagined how, with each brushstroke, I was rewriting my narrative. The freedom washed over me again, infusing me with strength. The shadows of my past were just that, shadows. With a newfound glimmer of hope, I assigned concrete meaning to my liberation. Each box I unpacked would symbolize the weight being lifted from my shoulders. Each object represented not just memories, but the choices that would define my present and future. As I moved through the brightness of new beginnings, I embraced the knowledge that I had escaped not just the physical chains around me, but the ones that had bound my heart and mind. The air buzzed around me, and I welcomed this exhilarating new chapter, ready to confront the world anew as I shaped my life into a masterpiece of my own making. Soon, my phone vibrated on the counter, jarring me from my reverie. I looked down to see a message alert. It was from my friend, filled with anticipation and excitement. I can't wait to see how you turn this place into a reflection of you. I chuckled softly, responding, just wait and see, the best is yet to come. With one last glance around my small apartment, I felt a sense of anticipation settle in. The music of my liberation played a sweet tune in my heart. It was time for me to write my own story, and I would do it without apology. I was no longer just the victim of my family's chaos. I was emerging as a dynamic force, ready to take on everything that lay ahead. The city was wrapped in a heavy quilt of snow. the kind that muffles sounds and dulls the harsh edges of reality. I had grown accustomed to the solitude of winter evenings, spending countless hours immersed in my books or busying myself with projects that pushed me forward. The walls of my apartment, my sanctuary, were decorated with memories of a life I believed I had escaped from. As I sipped my lukewarm tea, the familiar taste warming my insides, a sudden knock at the door broke the stillness. The sound echoed, sharp and unwelcome, disrupting the peace I had so carefully cultivated. I hesitated, frozen by a wave of apprehension. It was strange for someone to visit me unannounced, especially from my family, whom I had distanced myself from. My heart raced as I approached the door, uncertainty flooding my thoughts. I pulled the door open and was met with the unexpected sight of Aunt Linda. She looked worn and wilted, her face drawn and streaked with tears. "Victoria, please, I need to talk to you," she begged, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotion. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions surge within me. Here stood a woman who had played a significant role in my life once, a woman whose voice I had longed for during my hardest times, now rendered vulnerable before me. A part of me wanted to slam the door shut, to protect myself from the vulnerability she generously offered, but the other part recognized the despair etched in her features. There was something hauntingly genuine in her plea, so I took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing her into the sanctity of my space. "Come in," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. The moment she crossed the threshold, Aunt Linda sank onto the couch as though her legs could no longer support her. The cozy atmosphere of my apartment felt foreign now, filled with tension that thrummed in the air. I closed the door behind her and perched on the edge of a chair across from her, the distance between us still too great for comfort. "What's going on?" I inquired, my instinct to keep her at an arm's length battling with my desire to understand. She looked up at me, her eyes shiny and desperate. "They're going to lose the family home," she said, her words crashing over my heart like a tidal wave. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. The family home, that crumbling structure filled with a cacophony of memories, had always been a part of my identity. "Lose it," I echoed, struggling to comprehend. "How could that happen?" Aunt Linda wiped the tears from her cheeks with a trembling hand. "Your mother and Uncle Tony, they've been reckless, making choices that spiraled out of control. Their debts have piled up so high, they cannot manage it anymore." Her confession hung in the air, the gravity of it weighing on my chest. A peculiar mix of relief and sorrow coursed through me as I considered the implications of their fate. The family home had stood as a monument to our shared history, but perhaps I had never owned it in the same way they did. "What do they plan on doing?" I asked, keeping my tone clipped as a defense mechanism against the swell of emotion threatening to overtake me. Aunt Linda looked down, her fingers weaving through her gray-streaked hair. "They don't know. They're blinded by the mistakes they made, too proud to ask for help. I brought this on myself. I never stood up for you," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper as if speaking the words would summon the ghosts of our family's past. Those words hit me harder than I expected. What could I possibly say to someone who had stood back and let the tide of my life crash over me without lending a hand? "You have no idea how much I wished you had," I replied, trying to keep the resentment from chipping away at my hard-fought composure. "But please, Victoria," she continued, her desperate gaze piercing through my defenses, "understand that I own a part of this mess. I let them bully you, I let them push you away," she said, her voice thick with guilt. I noted the sincerity in her words and couldn't help but feel a flicker of empathy. This unexpected twist feels like my previous victory crumbling around me, I thought. Should I feel pity, sympathy, or was it still anger that I held close to my heart? As I struggled through the medley of emotions, I sighed deeply, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders once more. "Maybe what they really lost was each other," I finally replied, my voice steady, revealing no cracks in my otherwise newfound strength. For a moment, silence enveloped us. I could almost hear the snowflakes falling outside, a soft, serene contrast to the tempest within our hearts. "I know it sounds harsh, but sometimes family ties can choke you, and perhaps everything they cherished has slipped because they lost sight of what really mattered," I continued, my mind swirling with the complex, tangled web of betrayal, love, and survival. Aunt Linda nodded, her eyes searching mine. "You've grown so strong, Victoria." "I admire how you've reclaimed yourself after all they did to you," she said, her voice laced with awe. "But maybe you could find it in your heart to help us, to help them." just a few words, yet they felt heavy enough to topple the walls I had built around myself. Help them, I repeated, disbelief flooding my veins. After everything they put me through, the choices I made to distance myself, to escape. They are still your family, she replied, her voice soft yet firm. If things fall apart, would you want to live knowing you could have helped? I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, her question burrowing deep within me. My journey of reclaiming my voice had come full circle. The long road of bitterness warned me not to slip back into familiar patterns, but still, I found myself contemplating Aunt Linda's plea. Perhaps forgiveness was the next step I could take. You don't understand, I said sharply. This is not just a matter of pride for me, it's about protecting the pieces of myself that remain intact. Then why are we talking? She countered, her voice rising slightly. You can decide to heal, or you can choose to remain bitter. I am not asking you to forget what happened, only to choose how you want to move forward. I sat in silence, her words echoing in my mind. The fire was still crackling in the corner of my living room, illuminating the shadows that danced along the walls. Maybe this is the final twist in my story, I thought, an unexpected opportunity to heal. The image of my mother, the coldness in her voice, the dismissiveness, the way my worth seemed to vanish in her eyes, flashed before me. Anger still burned under the surface, but maybe, just maybe, I could carve a different realm among these family bonds. All right, I replied slowly, letting the word hang in the air as if testing its weight. I will consider it, but it doesn't mean I am promising anything. Aunt Linda's expression shifted, a glimmer of hope igniting in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, as if she anticipated the entire world shifting in her favor. It may take time, but I believe we can mend these fractured ties. I shifted my gaze to the window, watching the snow layer itself on the sill, falling softly amidst the stillness. A part of me remained bound by anger, chained to memories far too painful to revisit, while another part sensed an inkling of possibility on the horizon. The contrast was striking, a battle between the past and a future that seemed so uncertain, yet brimming with hope. Just remember, I said, my voice suddenly cold, this is not just about them, it is about me. I have carved my path, and however I choose to move forward, I will do it with my terms. Aunt Linda nodded, her face a mask of understanding, yet I could sense a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I trust you, Victoria. I know I have not made it easy for you to forgive me, but I believe in your strength. As she spoke those words, I felt an unfamiliar warmth blossoming within, not entirely a feeling of forgiveness, but a seed of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to look beyond the hurt and carve a bridge back towards my family. As the snow continued to fall, covering the world outside in a blanket of white, I took a deep breath, realizing that while I navigated the path ahead, I would remain vigilant. Even as I contemplated extending an olive branch, a part of me retained the fire of independence that had shielded me for so long. I could forge my own destiny, choose how to move forward. In the end, amid the turmoil of hurt, I might discover that redemption was not about erasing the past, but instead, reclaiming the power of my truth.